Okay, so this is the first episode of the KR show. And today we're going to talk about a wrestling show that is very important to me, maybe not as important to you, but this is Capital Combat 1990 from the NWA WCW.
Do you want to tell them why it's important to you?
Well, yeah. So this event is important to me because this was my first taste of wrestling when I was a kid. I would have been, let's see, counting on my fingers, I don't know, maybe 12, 13. And my dad gave me a VHS tape. And this VHS tape looked really janky, okay? Because it was one of those, I don't know what our audience is going to be, so I don't know if anyone listening is going to understand what I'm talking about. But a blank VHS tape, okay, was a tape that you would buy from the store and you would put it into your VCR and you could record things off TV. Well, someone had recorded Capital Combat 1990 without permission from WCW and under the radar of the FBI because they tell you shouldn't do that.
I can definitely say I never did that when I would watch pay-per-views.
No, yeah, you did. Yeah, because I was like, we've been friends since 7th grade, okay? And we are at a certain age at the moment. So it's been
5 or 10 years, maybe.
Maybe 20. But we've been friends for a long time, okay? And, more than 20.
It has been, actually, yeah.
Holy shit. Maybe 25, 26, 27. Wow. Okay. So, yeah. But we would watch pay-per-views at your house, like, all the time, okay? And you did have a collection of VHS tapes, and you would put your chicken scratch, and you would try to describe what was on the VHS tape.
Unless the FBI is listening, that never happened. WWE, I don't owe you money, I promise.
Well, I mean, yeah, they own everything. So if you recorded WCW, you recorded ECW, yeah, they'll get you. So anyway, back to my story. Okay, you derailed me. Okay, so this friend of my dad's had recorded Capital Combat 1990 on VHS, and on the label was scribbled, Capital Combat 90, Robocop. I didn't know what to think. I thought it was, hey, this has got a wrestling show on it, and after that, he also recorded Robocop. I didn't know that they were going to be one and the same when my feeble young mind watched it. But yeah, this was my first taste of wrestling. So my first company that I ever watched was NWA WCW.
As far as shows, watching it and kind of getting ready for this, that was a good show for your starter. I would have to say my starting show I ever watched was a Saturday Night's Main Event. The first match I ever watched, I remember, was the Rockers and the Orient Express. And I ended up being hooked just because of the Rockers' music, their flashy costumes, and all that stuff. Just kind of got me hooked on the business.
You were, yeah. I mean, that's a good, first match to watch. Definitely, because I was also a big fan of the Rockers as a kid. Although before, I want to say like 92. Most of what I watched was WCW. So we're going to jump into this. If you haven't watched this show, you can watch it on the Peacock, formerly the WWE Network. And they have it on there. You should be able to search Capital Combat, capital with an O instead of an A. Wikipedia has it listed as capital with an A, Combat. But on Peacock, it is capital with an O. Yeah. So anyway, this was May 19th, 1990 at the DC Armory in Washington, DC, if you couldn't have connected the dots. Attendance was about 7,500. And I think the capacity was about 10,000 people. And the tagline of this show is Return of Robocop. Okay, so this was actually the third WCW pay-per-view ever. And I didn't know that until I started, researching this event before we did this podcast. The first two WCW pay-per-views were Wrestle War 89, which was the year prior in May. And then they moved Wrestle War to February 1990. And then Wrestle War 90 was their second pay-per-view.
And then this was a Jim Herd WCW, right?
Yes. So Herd was with WCW, NWA from 88 to 92. So 4 years of tyranny as the executive vice president. And like this show was pretty good. We'll get into detail about why, but there are parts of it that feel very Jim Herd. His fingerprints are on it. And you can kind of, like if you've heard any of the mythology surrounding Jim Herd in WCW, what's one thing that pops into your head?
I never really heard a lot of positive stuff, honestly.
Like just off the top of your head, positive, negative, what is the one thing that pops out of your head from Jim Herd WCW?
Wasn't he involved in like a lot of the hokey stuff too that they did?
Oh yeah. So what hokey stuff pops into your head?
Well, after seeing this, it's definitely the RoboCop thing.
Okay. So the thing that pops out to me whenever I thought of Jim Herd WCW was the Ding Dongs. The Ding Dongs, who were I think one of the Armstrong brothers was a Ding Dong.
I think so.
Yeah. They pretty much just had the Armstrongs do a slew of really stupid things. I felt bad for the Armstrongs. Because anytime a booker got a really dumb idea, they're like, oh, let's get an Armstrong to do it. Because Brad Armstrong was the juicer, right? Mm-hmm. No, that was Art Barr. Brad Armstrong was the Candy Man.
He had some mask gimmicks, yeah.
Yeah. Jim Herd made him the Candy Man. And then I think one of them was definitely a Ding Dong. But anyway, the Ding Dongs, look them up. Two stupid looking guys in leotards. And they had like the shape of bells on their masks. I'm going to actually look that up. Ding Dongs WCW on the computer here. And I'm going to show Russell this picture.
They have bells on their gear even.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. On their wrists and ankles are bells. And Jim Herd just thought this was amazing. This was going to set the wrestling world on fire. Another silly idea. I don't know if you've heard about this one. Did you hear about what he wanted to do with Ric Flair?
I don't think so, no.
Okay, because he hated Ric Flair. All right. So what he wanted to do with Ric Flair is cut his hair and put an earring on him and call him Spartacus, and he would be a Roman gladiator.
That sounds terrible.
Yeah, it would have been. Yeah, super, super terrible. Flair, of course, refused to do that. I don't blame him. Rick, you made the right choice. But Jim Herd thought that Rick was like extremely hard to work with. And he was shooting down a lot of Jim's ideas because, Rick just thought Jim was an idiot. And
they probably were trash.
Yeah. And really like collectively, I think a lot of people back then and even today consider Jim to have been an idiot. He might be like a good guy. He might be like a smart individual. But as far as like professional wrestling goes, he didn't know shit from applesauce. When we talked last night, I said, I'm going to have to not curse when we do this.
You lasted about 5 minutes.
I did. I lasted about 5 minutes. Damn it. Okay. So Jim's actually from St. Louis.
Really?
Yeah. So we're recording in St. Louis, Missouri. And we used to be the murder capital of the United States.
We had that going for us.
We did. Yeah, we were number one. But anyway, Jim You want to know what Jim's experience was before he became executive vice president of WCW?
I'm sure they had a good reason for hiring him. Probably not.
If you had to guess in your head, what prepared him professionally to go from St. Louis to Atlanta, Georgia to run WCW, what would you think would be something you would look at if you're a Turner executive and you're hiring somebody to run this property of yours? What would you want them to have experience in?
Pro wrestling, like my thought would be the wrestling at the Chase or something like that, but I'm pretty sure he had no experience with that.
No, you're absolutely wrong. Okay, you're not even close. I'm just going to give it away. So he managed a Pizza Hut.
I mean, that's close.
He was a manager at a Pizza Hut here in St. Louis. And then next thing you know, he's the executive vice president of World Championship Wrestling. Yikes. So one thing I noticed, I don't know if you noticed it too, was watching this show, a lot of the wrestling felt pretty believable.
I would agree. There wasn't a lot of like wasted spots or hokey stuff or anything crazy like that when it came to bell.
There was some stupid stuff, okay, and we'll talk about that. Don't get us wrong. There was stupid things. But, you know, by and large, like a lot of the wrestling, when you're watching the matches, you could believe that these people are actually trying to win a match. There wasn't a lot of, whenever you'd see a dive, you wouldn't see somebody outside the ring standing there for a long time with their arms in the air waiting to catch them. And that's something you see a lot of today. And I'm not trying to be like nostalgia Andy over here saying, oh, well, you know, back in when I was watching wrestling, it was much better. But it was, okay? It just was. And a criticism that some of the fans or proponents of, I'm going to put it in quotation fingers, you can't see me, modern wrestling, is that the business has evolved and fans don't want to see headlocks for 10 minutes anymore. And I don't remember there being headlocks for 10 minutes back then.
I don't remember that either.
No, it's just an exaggeration, you know? And, you know, whenever you watch like movies and TV shows, you know, you want the actors in it to take things seriously. So why wouldn't you want the wrestlers you're watching to take what they do seriously too?
You would think, I mean, that makes sense.
It does. You know, and when you see a lot of modern wrestling today and you see the people standing outside the ring for an extended period of time with their arms in the air waiting to catch somebody and it just looks phony, you criticize any of that and, you know, they tell you, well, you know, I mean, kayfabe's gone, you know, so like, who cares if anything looks phony? But again, you know, like I want the wrestlers that I'm watching to take what they do seriously. What's one of your favorite movies, Russell?
Favorite movies? Mm-hmm. Probably Braveheart's one of them.
God damn. Okay, all right. So Braveheart, okay? So Mel Gibson's playing a Scottish guy, right?
Yes.
Okay. Who's he play?
William Wallace.
Okay, William Wallace. So there's the performance that he gave as William Wallace in Braveheart. But what if he instead went out there and he was like, I'm William Wallace. Oh, I'm Scottish. Would that have immersed you into the story?
Definitely not. It would have been stupid.
No, yeah, exactly. So if he didn't take it seriously and he dicked around and phoned it in, the movie would not have been very good to you.
No, definitely not.
No. So that's the problem that we have in wrestling is that today there aren't a lot of, you know, wrestlers or even companies that are taking it seriously and trying to portray themselves as a company that has professional wrestlers who all want to win and they want to win matches and they want to win championships. It's, yeah. Anyway, I could go like on and on and on about modern wrestling and sound like a complete boomer, but we don't have that kind of time. So we're going to jump into Capital Combat.
Let's do it.
All right, let's do it. This show actually, the first 3 matches, they actually happened before a lot of the fans actually got into the arena because there was a printing error on the tickets, and the starting time for the show was listed as 8 p.m. instead of 7. 7's when it actually started, but a lot of the people that bought tickets ended up filing in an hour into the show and found out that the thing had already started. I would have been a little pissed.
I'd have been mad about that. Yeah.
Yeah, because they missed, I think, some pretty decent stuff.
The opening match was solid. That 6-man.
Yeah. The 6-man was good. You know, they also missed. Did they miss? They couldn't have missed the hair versus hair, right?
I don't think they missed the hair versus hair. They would have missed Mark Callis and Johnny Ace.
Okay.
Which was a pretty decent match. You saw a couple of moves from Mark that kind of were used in his signature time as Taker as well.
Yeah, and we'll get into that match soon. But it was, pretty much a close to sellout crowd because a lot of the seats were not available for purchase because they were blocked off for the stage and the set. And this is definitely retro WCW because they had the ramp. Mm-hmm. They loved that ramp. I think the wrestlers hated it. They didn't like it. I liked seeing it because it gave WCW this sort of unique look.
It made them look different compared to everyone else at the time.
Yeah, and everyone else being
WWE.
WWF. Yeah. It was the F back then.
That's true.
Yeah, so the first 3 matches were not included on the Turner Home Entertainment VHS release, and they edited the show down to about a 2-hour show. Now, the first 3 matches you can, if you want to see them, you can watch them on Peacock. But if you were around back then and you weren't Kevin and got an illegal VHS copy of the show, you couldn't see those matches. But I did because, I felt pretty special. Yes, so WCW also, I don't know if you know this, but the Samoan SWAT team were wrestling for the, originally supposed to wrestle for the United States tag team titles against Pillman and Z-Man. But they didn't show up to a taping the month prior. So because they didn't show up to the taping, I guess whoever, maybe Jim Herd, was saying, okay, well, if they can't show up, fuck them. We're going to give it to somebody else. And they ended up giving it to the Midnight Express, which...
You can't really go wrong there.
No, it seemed pretty serendipitous that the Midnight Express got it instead of the SWAT team. Nothing against the SWAT team, because they were very good. But, as we'll talk about in a little bit, the Midnight Express against Z-Man and Pillman was a much better match. Also, on this VHS tape, after the show was over, okay, I didn't know that this was on there, but a recording of Saturday Night with Connie Chung was on this tape.
Where she talked about wrestling, or what was...
Yes, yeah. So a lot of people say that Vince McMahon was the one who, blew kayfabe away and told everyone that everything they're watching is staged. But actually, it might have been WCW in 1990 that allowed that to happen on a large scale first. Because what they did was they allowed Connie Chung and her film crew total access backstage. So they were walking around backstage and they were talking about color schemes that they give good guys and bad guys, how the shows are written and formatted, and they even showed sketches for El Giante's outfit.
His spaceman outfit or whatever that weird thing he used to wear.
It was like an intergalactic, Jim Herd probably had a thing for Roman gladiators.
Probably, he kind of fit that part.
Yeah, he had, I don't know how much a guy from Brazil or Peru, South America, okay, fits into the Roman gladiator thing.
He's got the big size and look and everything.
He probably could have killed the tiger, But this outfit, this costume, it looked like one of the Roman gladiator skirts. If there's any Roman gladiators watching and you don't want it to be called a skirt, I'm sorry, okay? And it had a sash that went across his chest, and he had a headband. He had a headband. So he looked really intimidating dressed like that. He actually was not, he could have been a very intimidating looking guy.
He could have been, honestly.
He could have been, but the costume was stupid, and he always looked confused or like happy.
He always looked way too happy, like a big guy that was wanting to hurt someone, and he's out there smiling all the time. It just really didn't.
Which is a shame, because he was 7'7", and he not terribly athletic, clumsy in the ring, but there was probably something somebody maybe could have done with him. And by all account, like all the stories I've heard about El Gigante, Giant Gonzalez, was that he was a super sweet guy, really nice. Everybody loved him, except we didn't love him as kids because we weren't into any of his matches because they were really bad.
They were pretty terrible.
Yeah. Now this clip from Connie Chung's TV special, you can't really find it on the internet anymore. I used to watch it on YouTube, and Conrad Thompson, who does every podcast about wrestling on the internet, shared it on Facebook a while back, but WWE has since filed a copyright claim and had it taken down. So now I can't find it. So if anybody knows where this thing is, where we can watch it, let us know in the comment section. And yeah, I would love to see that again and actually show it to Russell.
I've never seen it before.
Yeah, so it was just bizarre to see that, because it was the kind of stuff that you would have seen in Beyond the Mat. And the storyline, the main storyline leading into Capital Combat 90 was the Horseman and Sting and Luger. At Clash of the Champions 10 in February that year, Flair, Arn, and Ole turned on Sting because he used to be a Horseman.
He was a part of the Horsemen for a while.
Yeah, and I didn't know this because I didn't start watching it until, May 1990. But Sting, to me, in hindsight, seemed like a weird fit for the Horsemen.
He's not someone that I would expect to be a Horseman member, especially with the way they did things and what they did, and Sting really didn't just fit into that.
No, so I totally get why Flair, Arn, and Ole were like, no, we got to cut this guy loose. And they didn't just kick him out, they beat his ass. But they kicked him out of the group because he accepted a title match against Flair. And they beat him up, and from that attack, he needed surgery. I don't know if he legitimately got hurt or what was going on. I would think it was a legitimate injury,
and
because
they figured out.
Yeah, if you've got a star as big as Sting, you would want to put him on shows. And if this happened in February, Capital Combat was in May. Sting's still not wrestling. Sting's friend at the time, Lex Luger, was wrestling Ric Flair at Wrestle War 90 in February, the same month that Sting got attacked. And Sting's outside the ring on crutches, and then the Horsemen start attacking him. Luger has Flair up in the torture rack, and this is like an awesome moment. So if you get a chance to watch this show too, it's Wrestle War 90 on Peacock. The drama and the tension and how Jim Ross was selling it like this was a crime against humanity, it just felt really cool. It felt really big. It felt super important. And Luger dropped Flair from the torture rack and went outside to help Sting, and in the process got counted out. I didn't even care about the count out. Like, that was have you seen that?
I haven't. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, check it out. And then the championship committee they said that Luger could have a rematch, but he didn't need to accept the rematch in May because at the time he had an infection in his knee, and Luger, to defend the honor of his friend Sting, who, everybody loved, man, woman, child, animal, and mineral. Everybody loved Sting. Yeah, so then that's how we got the rematch between Ric Flair and Lex Luger in the cage, which was meant to keep the Four Horsemen out. A little bit of foreshadowing.
It didn't really happen, though, but we'll get to that.
You're just going to spoil it right now? They don't know that because they haven't watched the show.
Sorry.
Okay, we'll probably cut that part out.
Okay.
Jerk. All right. So now we're going to jump into the matches. The style of WCW at the time, if you compared it to WWF at the time, how would you describe WWF?
WWF was still at that time kind of like rock and roll wrestling. They were more concentrated, I felt like, on the presentation as much as, if not even more, maybe than what happened in the ring, bell to bell.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with that. And WCW was a lot more in ring, but they did have storylines.
Yeah.
But it was this WCW during this era was very Southern wrestling, because when you're watching these matches, a lot of them have a lot of crowd work. They'll just have guys, working the crowd, leaving the ring, stalling, and that's not always the funnest thing to watch on TV. But when you're there live, it's great because you get to run your mouth to the wrestlers and have a good time. But yeah, it's very Southern wrestling. So it's almost night and day if you put them side by side with WWF. So the first match, the 6-man tag, the Road Warriors and good old Norman against Kevin Sullivan, Cactus Jack, and Bam Bam Bigelow. What did you think of Norman's scooter?
I was not a big fan of it. It was entertaining and funny, but compared to the Road Warriors on their motorcycles and him on the scooter.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Road Warriors didn't even get to... WWF let the Road Warriors ride motorcycles by themselves to the ring a couple years later at SummerSlam. WCW didn't let them do that this time. WCW made them ride on the back of the motorcycles while these two bikers drove Hawk and Animal to the ring. So to me, it looked kind of weird.
I could see that because it's not like these guys aren't the big tough guys riding out on motorcycles. They're kind of riding on the back of them.
Yeah, they were right in the bitch seat, standing.
They were more, standing.
Yeah, they were standing. Norman comes out on his little kick scooter, which was very stressed out. Okay, there's not a kick scooter that exists that was having a harder time than Norman's.
That's a lot of hold.
It was. It really was. What'd you think of the big kahuna, Oliver Humperdinck?
I thought he looked like a drunken mess. The way his gear was, his outfit, whatever he wore, it was half buttoned up. And
yeah, he gave off drunk uncle vibes.
Pretty much.
He looked like he was in his pajamas, and he had tennis shoes on. And he had a button up that was unbuttoned, and all of his chest and everything was just flapping out to the world. And yeah, he looked like someone's drunk uncle had stumbled in, and they just let him be wrestling manager that night.
And for the team that he managed, the prestige of Bam Bam Bigelow, Cactus Jack, and Kevin Sullivan, that's a pretty big group there to be a part of.
And it's cool that they just let somebody's uncle manage them that night. That's cool. Maybe he won a contest.
Possibly.
Or something. Who could eat the most hot dogs?
Maybe his gear was lost. Maybe it was on the plane.
Sure.
They lost his gear.
Yeah, he had something awesome in his bag, but it didn't go through baggage at the airport.
American Airlines strikes again.
Oh man, Oliver Humperdinck's awesome gear was just lost. So now he has to wear his pajamas. Someone else's pajamas, too. If he buttoned that shirt up, it wouldn't have fit him.
It definitely would not have fit him.
No. Go back and watch it. This is one of the reasons you should watch Capital Combat, is to see the mess that is Oliver Humperdinck at the beginning of this show. I think he's dead. Oliver, if you're not dead, I'm sorry. That would have been disrespectful. But if he is dead... We're not wanting to speak ill of the dead, but wow, what a mess. Now, Gary Michael Capetta was the ring announcer, and I preferred Gary Michael Capetta.
He was good.
Yeah, because it gave this big sports feel to the introductions. Although throughout the night, he bumbled a lot of these. It was like he had seen the names for the first time, and he didn't practice any of it beforehand or get with anybody to find out how to pronounce.
The pronunciation was off on more than one occasion, for sure.
Yeah. And did you catch what he called the Road Warriors?
I did not.
He called them the Legion of Doom, the Road Warriors.
So he mixed both names together.
Yeah. And I don't know the lore behind all of this, but then Hawk and Animal would end up going to WWF after their run in WCW. And maybe they thought, oh, you know what? Legion of Doom sounds pretty sweet. Let's use that because we can't use
the Road Warriors.
The Road Warriors, yeah. Now, I noticed that Hawk and Animal were just laying it in.
They were pretty stiff.
Yeah. They were laying it in. Norman was like, what's a docile, harmless animal that you would not be afraid to meet in the wild?
Not be afraid to meet in the wild?
Yeah.
Like maybe like a bird or something?
A bird, something a little bigger than a bird. A bird. Listen to me. I'm asking you for an animal in the wild that's harmless and docile. A deer.
A deer could work.
You could have said deer, and you said a bird. Yeah. So Norman was like a bird, and Hawk and Animal were like big brown bears, just mauling everybody in the Sullivan, Cactus, Bam Bam. I felt bad for him because they were getting stiffed, especially Cactus.
Cactus got it the most, I think. But
Yeah.
he probably was the one probably most okay with something like that.
Oh, yeah. Because Cactus's Mick Foley, his MO, especially in the 90s, was I need to do terrible things to my body that will get me attention, and then because of that, people will like me. It ended up working for him. I mean, his quality of life isn't great now because of it. I'd say if anybody had a bump card, his was huge.
His probably should have expired a long time ago.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Because he took some bumps in this match that were just nuts. Did you see that clothesline that he gave, or he tried to give Hawk, and he flew over the top rope?
He flipped over the top rope with it.
Yeah. He tried to clothesline Hawk, and I think he tried to do the that suicide clothesline. And then maybe Hawk was like, I'm not taking that, brother.
That's very possible.
Ducked, and then Cactus flew over the top rope, smacked on the floor, and then Hawk clotheslined him off the apron, whipped him over the guardrail so hard, and you didn't even really get to see Cactus fly over the rail much, because he just hit the guardrail and then immediately like flipped over and smacked on the concrete on the other side.
There was a lot of impact with that.
Oh, yeah. And then Hawk picked up the ring stairs. There's these large wooden ring stairs, and you didn't get to see him throw it, but as Cactus is coming over the guardrail to get back in the ring, okay, you get to see these stairs fly out of nowhere and hit Cactus in the back, and then he just crumbles to the floor. You remember what Bob Caudle said after Cactus got hit by the stairs?
I don't. What did he say?
Okay, so Caudle, rest in peace, great ring announcer. He said that the stairs must have weighed a couple 100 pounds.
Wooden stairs?
Yep, these blue wooden stairs probably weighed a couple 100 pounds.
Maybe not.
No, they're not a couple 100 pounds.
Maybe a couple pounds, but
oh my God, they're maybe like, I don't know. I am not a wooden stair aficionado. Okay, if anybody listening to this is, maybe you could look at said stairs and tell us what you think an exact approximation would be for these stairs. But I'm gonna guess that they're maybe like 40 pounds. Max.
I was thinking 50.
50? Okay, definitely not a couple 100, Bob. But like he was trying like all night to like make a lot of things sound worse than they actually are. But I thought that was silly. And then, what'd you think of the match like as a whole?
I thought the match was all right as a whole. I thought the finish of it was a little strange because the Road Warriors, Legion of Doom, whatever you want to call them, are known for doing that Doomsday Device clothesline, which is a little bit more devastating because it's coming off of Animal's shoulders. But Hawk just hit a regular top rope clothesline on Sullivan. The finish...
Actually, that's called an unassisted Doomsday Device.
An unassisted Doomsday Device.
Yeah, I mean, I came up with that.
That's good. I like it.
Yeah, thanks. But yeah, I mean, it was a hard-hitting match. It was great. It was, about just shy of 10 minutes. Decent time. That would obviously not be the case with, the matches coming up. But this was, a good length of time, good match. Norman and the Road Warriors went over. What'd you think of Norman?
I liked the gimmick that they did with him. I liked it a lot better than what he ended up doing later in WWF with Bastion Booger. I thought this was a lot more fun gimmick.
Really? You liked Norman more than Bastion Booger?
I hated Bastion Booger, honestly. I hated this gear. I think maybe part of what I hated the most about him was his gear. It looked like duct tape when he was Bastion Booger.
You have probably had a recent head injury, because there's no way that Norman is better than Bastion Booger.
If you're listening and you want to comment on who's right about this, let us know that Bastion Booger was way worse than Norman. But your opinion is your opinion.
As long as as long as your opinion's my opinion, we're cool. But Bastion Booger was way better than Norman, because there was Bastion Booger was a lot more entertaining. Okay, yes, the duct tape outfit was off-putting. Okay, but you also had you got to see Bastion Booger just eat raw chickens, and come to the ring shoveling food into his mouth. That's the only way that I can describe it. He's not how you're just sitting there eating
It's not like a normal person would just eat.
No, you're not taking a chip and then putting it in your mouth and biting it and swallowing it. Shoveling is the only term I could use to accurately describe what he was doing with the food, because he would just shovel that stuff into his mouth. He doesn't want to taste it. He doesn't want to savor it. He doesn't want to enjoy eating. He needs to just jam it into his mouth hole. His finisher was funny.
His finisher was funny. I still was not a fan of it, but it was at least amusing.
He would do the little dance, and then he would just sit right there.
Just drop right to his knees on you.
He would. So yeah, I definitely preferred Bastion Booger over Norman. Norman just looked like he was billed from the state hospital or the state asylum, or I don't remember what Gary Michael Capetta said Norman was from, but it was some state mental facility. And apparently this facility, we are to believe that Norman is being taken care of around the clock by adults and trained physicians, but then they think, what's really good for him is if we let him out every now and then
to wrestle,
to be a pro wrestler, okay, where he can get physical and hurt people. That's what we need to do. So then they don't dress him. They don't give him, ring gear. They let him just come straight from the state hospital to WCW's matches, wearing exactly what he's wearing.
With a scooter. You got to get from the hospital somehow.
You're a biker, okay? I'm wanting you to imagine this, okay?
Okay.
So you're a biker.
Yes.
Okay. What would your biker name be if you're a biker? Off the top of your head. Say a tough word.
It would be some kind of tough word if I was a biker. But nails, chains, skull,
8-ball,
something like that. Yeah.
Something cool. Okay. So you're a tough biker. All right. And your two buddies are driving Hawk and Animal to the ring.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And you've got a motorcycle. Okay. You look at Norman, and he asks you for a ride on the back of your motorcycle. You gonna let him?
I would not.
No. So that's why he's got the kick scooter. Okay. They're like, no, we don't have any room for you, bud. Sorry. Okay. So then, he commandeers a kick scooter, maybe from a kid.
Probably from a kid.
Yeah.
Ate them and then took their scooter.
He ate them?
He might have.
Wow. That went from 0 to 10. He just ate the child and took the scooter. All right. Okay. So he took the scooter and he's scooting along. He's got a plastic bag of items that he had. I thought it was going to be food. but he had like shirts, and he sort of like half-assed threw them into the crowd. Yeah, he didn't throw them very far. So like, if you were in the third row, you didn't get it.
You probably didn't want it in the first row anyway, so you weren't missing much in the third row.
Do you think it was safe being in the plastic bag, or do you think it?
Probably not. I'm sure that plastic bag was used before, probably with food in it or something.
Yeah.
Probably not washed.
Right. Because when I've had jobs in offices, that looked like something that people would carry their nasty office lunch food in.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly what it looked like.
That they would let sit in the office fridge for months, and then it would like grow bacterias or amoebas or whatever. I'm not a scientist. I don't know what actually mold. There we go. So yeah, Bastion Booger way better than Norman.
Let us know what you think, but it's
But
a
I'm right.
toss-up.
I'm right. No, I'm right. I can't. That's Norman. Oh my God. How did you, before we go into this next match, how did you watch Norman in that match and go, that's it?
I didn't say it was good. I just said compared to Bastion Booger, I preferred that.
Oh my God. So Mike Shaw, rest in peace, was a pretty good wrestler. And before WCW, he was actually in Stampede Wrestling. He was in Stampede there for a while, and about 7 years, I think. And and he had wrestled like, every big name you could imagine over there in Stampede. And, he was a heel, and he was pretty over and just having like a great time. And then he gets hired by the big time. He gets to go to WCW and get some of that guaranteed money. And then, unfortunately, he hops in during Jim Herd, and then Jim Herd takes one look at him,
and that's what he came up with. And then you got to think he was probably like, well, there goes my big shot.
He's like, you know what, boy? I got just the gimmick for you, okay? And I'm going to make you Norman the Lunatic, okay? And one half of a podcast 30 years in the future is going to absolutely love it. And he's going to argue that it is way better than something you're going to do for a much bigger company in a few years.
He didn't last long there either, though.
No, he was in WCW for like, was it a couple years?
I think a couple years he spent doing that, unfortunately for him.
Yeah. And then he went to the Global Wrestling Federation, which was, because it's got the word global in it, that the Jarretts were associated with it. Then he went to Mexico and other indies, and then he would become Bastion Booger.
Your hero.
Oh, my hero. Listen to you. It's not my hero. I didn't have Bastion Booger posters when I was a kid. Okay? God. That would be a bigger poster than normal.
That actually would. That'd be a pretty giant poster.
Yeah, I'd have to pay a lot more for that. You couldn't go to Sam Goody and find a Bastion Booger poster. Sam Goody was a music and DVD store, in case people listening don't know what that is. So anyway, can we get on to Johnny Ace versus Mark?
Let's do it.
Okay. So this was actually Johnny Ace's last match in WCW.
It was actually the first time, because I'd never really watched a lot of the old 80s WCW, so this was the first time I'd seen Mark in this persona. So it was actually, I enjoyed the match. I thought it was pretty good between the two of them. Ace had a pretty good dive out of the ring.
He did. And it was a good dive because it didn't look like, Mean Mark wasn't just standing there waiting to catch him.
No, the timing was perfect for it.
Yeah, he had gotten up and he was looking, towards the entrance. And then when he had turned around in just the right moment, and Johnny Ace hit him, and it just looked great. But Johnny Ace, I felt like secondhand embarrassment and cringe watching Johnny Ace in this match. Because I don't know if you caught this, but Johnny Ace gets back into the ring after, I think, the dive, and he starts like trying to get the fans to chant something. And the fans aren't having it, okay? They don't want to chant whatever it is that Johnny Ace wants them to chant. He kept trying to like get him going, but the fans just were not into Johnny Ace. You were, though.
I thought the match was good. I preferred more Mark Calloway or Mean Mark than I did Johnny Ace. I was more entertained with watching him because I'd never really seen Johnny Ace wrestle too much in that persona either. I always knew that he was a part of like a team called the Dynamic Dudes, but I didn't watch a lot of that time frame of WCW.
Yeah, there's a really funny story that we can't do justice about the Dynamic Dudes and Johnny Ace's time in them. In the Dynamic Dudes, yes. So he was a tag team with Shane Douglas, and they looked like two idiots who had, these really like terrible 80s clothes, even for the time. And they would ride skateboards to the ring. And there's a really funny story about that that Shane Douglas tells. You can find that on YouTube. Hilarious. Check it out. But this is a family show, so I can't.
You can't really talk about it.
No. There's families that are going to be listening to this, so I can't.
I think the most they cheered Johnny was when he missed that clothesline.
Yeah, when he screwed up, then the fans they popped.
They loved that.
They loved it, and they loved it when Mean Mark would beat Johnny Ace up. They cheered him. They weren't supposed to, but Johnny Ace was just, like technically, there was nothing wrong with what he was doing, okay? But he just wasn't very fun to watch in that match. To me, he was more of a chore to watch because like you can do all the moves in the world and know how to do them. But if you've got no personality and you can't get people behind you, it doesn't matter.
No, I agree with that. I was more interested by catching the different moves of Mark doing that we would see him do later on. I thought it was interesting that he walked the top rope to do that elbow drop that he did. Yeah, and
that looked great. And I'm sure like Vince ended up getting a tape of that when Mark would later leave WCW and go to WWF, and he's like, oh yeah, I totally want you. So yeah, the elbow drop off the top rope looked, I just thought that looked cool. And at the time you didn't see a lot of people doing stuff like that.
No, and his flying clothesline was pretty much on par to what he came to do too in the WWF.
Yeah, and Bob Caudle, so Teddy Long was Mean Mark's manager, okay? And later on, Teddy Long was going to have a hair versus hair match against Precious Paul Ellering, who was the manager of the Road Warriors, okay? So Bob, during this match, is referencing the hair versus hair match that we're going to see later, and he says, and I'm not making this up, Bob said that Teddy Long might be a skinhead after tonight if he loses his hair.
I can't. Part of me is surprised of that, but then when you think of like the 80s Southern wrestling, stuff like that probably slid in there.
Would they have thought, yeah, that's a good thing? This is the South. No, I'm not. So yeah, they cheered when Johnny missed the clothesline off the top rope, and they loved it when Mean Mark beat him up. What'd you think of the Slamometer?
The Slamometer, I thought that was amusing. Jim Ross's, he tried.
Yeah, he tried to get that over, and that was probably a Jim Herd thing.
Probably.
Like it was going to make what we're watching seem more impactful if there was this arbitrary, like, what would you think a slamometer would look like?
I would see it like being a big circle with like green on one side, red, and then like the needle going one way or the other. Either way, however they would have done it would have been freaking terrible and it would have looked stupid. But that's how I would picture it. Like it just popping up there and being like the needle going one way or another.
Okay, so you've got the slamometer. Where do you think you would install the slamometer to get an appropriate reading?
If I were trying to actually do something like that, you would think it would be on the ring, under the ring, something like that.
I would think it would need to be attached to the ring.
You would think so. Definitely attached to the ring somewhere.
It wasn't attached to the ring.
It was not.
I would even go so far as to say I don't think the slamometer existed.
I'm pretty sure it did not. Hopefully it did not.
And Bob Cottle's like, well, what did it rank on the slamometer? And Ross said, it's still calibrating. Oh, but the elbow drop off the top rope scored an 8.2 on the slamometer.
That's a pretty big one.
That's a pretty big one. That's a big one. And then we go backstage. Gordon Solie is. What do you think of Gordon Solie?
I thought he was good for the times. Like he reminded me of like one of those straightforward ring announcers, like, or someone like backstage interviewer or something like that. He was very, for that style of wrestling they had, he was kind of to the point, dressed, and let's get to it. Let's interview these people. That's what I'm here to do. It's not take attention or anything like that. They were just the background to the show.
Yeah, he wasn't trying to ever get himself over. You know, he was trying to get over what was in front of him. And, you know, he just was another one of these guys that just sort of gave what you're watching a little bit more legitimacy.
Yeah.
Which is great considering what he's about to do.
When you're interviewing Sting and RoboCop, I mean, you kind of have to be, you want to be in the background and give them, and try to make it as legitimate as possible.
Gordon Solie tried so hard to make Sting and RoboCop look like the heroes, and he tried to make the Horsemen seem like the worst monsters that have ever existed. So he's back there, and there are two security guards guarding some double doors, and there's this ominous blue light peeking through the creaks in the doors. Okay, and Solie tells us that he can't go into the locker room. He's not allowed. And he says that the Horsemen, the big problem that Sting has with the Horsemen isn't that they beat him up or they beat up his friend Lex Luger. Do you remember what Solie said was the worst thing the Horsemen did, and that's why Sting wants revenge?
Because he threatened the Stingers, right?
He threatened the little Stingers. So he tried to sell this in such a way where the four horsemen threatened children. Like they were gonna beat up all the kids. So Sting had to stop that. I don't want Ric Flair to put a figure four on a child. I have to fight the Horsemen.
Do you think that the kid that got his scooter stolen, he was probably a Stinger?
Yeah. Maybe the Horsemen had beat him up and Norman just happened to find the scooter
maybe
next to the body of the child. I don't know. You know, it's a good thing all this is over, because this would have been like stuff Jim Herd would have been writing down.
It would have.
You know, oh God,
we gotta do that.
We gotta set up a backstage segment. Okay, hear me out. Ric Flair, Ole, Arn, and Sid are going to attack a child. Okay, they're going to beat him up, and then his scooter, he was on a scooter to deliver medicine to a hospital. I don't know why. I mean, I don't know. So he's delivering medicine to a hospital so that his grandpa could live.
See, I would picture it as like he's coming on the scooter, he goes around the corner, and like Sid used to do that big boot. So yeah. Sid just sticks his leg up out of the corner, and the kid just runs right into the boot. And
well, he doesn't have to stick it up high.
He doesn't.
You know, he's already like 11 feet tall. He's huge. how big is a child? Probably what? 3 feet tall?
Probably about 3 feet tall.
Yeah, he just kind of has to put his foot up a little bit.
Bam, they run right into it.
Bam. And then his scooter's down. The horsemen cheer because they've just assaulted a child, because that's what they love, is beating up kids. And then Norman doesn't help the child, okay, who's probably groaning if he's still alive. And then he just takes his scooter because, he's got a match to go to.
He's got to get ready.
Yeah. But why would they let Norman, why would the mental hospital let Norman just walk around the street? Why wouldn't there be orderlies?
You would think there would be some kind of orderlies.
Yeah, to make sure that Norman doesn't lose his cool and starts like attacking everyone, literally everyone in the building.
It was probably something that they didn't put a lot of thought into. They're like, hey, this will be a great idea. We don't need the backstory.
I'm starting to think he actually wasn't in a state.
Probably not.
So, yeah, the four horsemen wanted to beat up kids, and Sting drew the line in the sand, and he said, no, that's too much. You can beat me up, you can beat my friend up, but you can't threaten the little stingers. And now I'm going to get revenge, but Lex Luger has a match, so I'm going to get Robocop. I'm going to get fucking Robocop. Yeah. Which I found out that this was promotion for the second Robocop movie, which would come out, I think, the following month.
Which would make sense, because when we get to that segment, we can explain a little bit more, but it felt like there was really no reason for this to be there. So promotion for a movie makes sense, because it was like, hey, let's do this, and let's put absolutely no other thought into it.
You didn't enjoy that?
I did not.
Oh, okay, that's surprising, because you like Norman. Okay, so the next match, the Samoan SWAT team of Fatu and the Savage against Mike Rotunda and Tommy Rich. This thing went 17 minutes.
On paper, it sounds like a good idea. It sounds like a decent match, but once they did it, it just went way too long. Like either they didn't tell them, hey, stick to your times, or they thought that 20 minutes was acceptable, but it was not.
Maybe they thought they were going to get more time out of RoboCop.
Possibly.
But then Gordon was not allowed in the locker room to do the interview. And they were like, well, nope. Okay, guys, make this match just obscenely long, okay, so that everybody's good and bored.
The ceremony took way too long, too. Their Samoan ceremony that Fatu and Samu did.
Yeah, that's Southern wrestling, because you could do what they did in front of a live crowd, and the live crowd would just totally eat it up, because the heels are trying to do this ceremony before their match, and they tried it 5 times before they actually got to it. So they ate up minutes and minutes and minutes at the start of the match just for that. Watching it, it wasn't a lot of fun. But that's the live event experience versus the visual experience, watching it on TV, or in this case, a pirated VHS tape. That's tracking was all messed up. So JR had mentioned during this that Teddy Long's hair match would be next, and told the fans, don't go to the refrigerator.
They had plenty of time to cook a 4-course meal during this match.
They did. Because the entire match was basically the Samoan SWAT team beating up Bray Wyatt's dad.
Pretty much.
Wearing him out, and Tommy Rich was probably the most useless tag team partner ever.
He ate the pin.
Yeah, he's not in the thing at all. And then he gets tagged in, and then he ends up losing the match. I'm trying to remember, because I'm not sure when I'm asking this. Did they do this splash off the top like they did with the head shrinkers? Was that their finish, or did they do something different? I don't.
It just went so long that it just, like, I tried to block everything Like you tried to remember the important parts, but there really wasn't any in 17 minutes.
Yeah. Now, Fatu did kick Rotunda outside the ring in the face, and you didn't even see the thigh slap.
No.
Today, they want to make sure that the camera is on them before they slap their thigh, so it looks good and fake.
That was a solid looking kick too.
Yeah.
That was actually pretty good.
And Bob Caudle again, just with these gyms, okay? He said that Rotunda doesn't know the word submit, okay? So it's not in his vocabulary, Bob adds. And then Jim Ross says, I don't think Mike Rotunda has ever given up. But we don't know that. Because if Rotunda doesn't know the word submit in his matches, maybe he's wanted to give up before, but he just didn't know the word for it.
He just didn't know how to quit.
No, he just literally didn't know how to quit.
I mean, if Bob Caudle's right, that could be true.
Yeah, he didn't. The word isn't his vocabulary. So he's wanted to end the match because he's in too much pain before, but because of his own massive illiteracy, he couldn't do it. He didn't know how to give up. That would be kind of sad.
That would be sad.
Yeah. Mike Rotunda would later go on to be IRS, and he would end up doing that sit clothesline that you saw in the match, where he runs off the ropes and clotheslines a guy in the WWF.
Former tag team champion with DiBiase. Pretty good career in both places, actually.
He was actually a WWF tag team champion with Barry
Windham
too. Yeah.
in the U.S. Express.
Yep. I didn't even know the name of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. U.S. Express. Everyone was an Express.
They were. The Orient Express,
Midnight Express, U.S. Express, Rock and Roll Express. Yep. Panda Express. All of them. You know, all of them were good expresses. Yes. So the match was like, okay, but, you know, it really went too long and, you know, it dragged out. Really, that thing could have been 10 minutes.
I was going to say, I feel like it would have been a good match had they cut about at least 7-8 minutes off of it. The people that they had in the match had potential to be a solid match if they would have went an 8 to 10 instead of 17.
Yeah, and Tommy Rich, Wildfire Tommy Rich, awful tag team partner, spends the entire match on the apron waiting to get tagged, finally gets tagged in. The Samoans do a couple moves to him, boom, he's
Over.
pinned. Yep, and it's over. Now, before the next match, this is a very WCW thing, because they would regularly have like contests and sweepstakes, and then they would make that a part of the pay-per-views, even as late as Halloween Havoc 95, where they brought people in who won motorcycles.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
I remember that.
When you bring in fans and you put them into the show, it's always awkward. And this was hilariously bad. Mr. and Mrs. Robert Benner were the winners.
They won the Capital Combat Sweepstakes.
They won the Capital Combat Sweepstakes, yes. Now, before Mrs. Benner gets her cue, the camera's already on her, and
She looks like she's scared to death.
she looks terrified, okay? And she looks like someone's holding a gun to her. Then when she is told that the camera is on her and her husband, Robert, are laughing, and then they smile and, you know, wave at the camera. But it's funny to see how awkward that is before. Just a bad communication.
It was like, even if they didn't know, they could have, prepared her for, hey, the camera's going to be on you around this time. Mm-hmm. So that way, in case we miss our cue. I mean,
Yeah.
they couldn't get the time right on the tickets, so how are they going to get a cue right?
Yeah, please don't look frightened when our cameras are on you, okay? We don't want people to think that you'll be terrified if you enter our contests, okay? They're not scary. Apparently they are. Mrs. Robert Benner was onto something.
Possibly.
Then we had arguably the match of the night.
Hair versus hair.
Hair versus hair, baby. Precious Paul Ellering and Teddy Long, Theodore R. Long.
Theodore R. Long.
Is what he was called. But actually, he had another name that he wanted to be called. Sugar Ray Long.
Yep.
And if you haven't seen this match, you really need to see this. It's only about a minute and a half, okay? Nothing egregious. But Teddy comes out in a boxing robe, boxing headgear, and boxing gloves.
And didn't he try to eye gouge Ellering, and Ellering actually sold it?
You can't gouge someone's eyes with boxing gloves. But apparently Teddy Long could. and Bob Caudle, again, just on point this entire night. Bob suggested that the reason that Teddy is so effective with those boxing gloves is because he has an entire brick in his gloves.
Which one would not fit and two would break his hand, but that's beside the point.
Right. Yeah. But you can't. Bob Caudle doesn't exist in our world.
Yeah, exactly.
He lived in another dimension where all of these things are possible. Okay? The ring stairs were 200 pounds. Teddy Long has an entire brick in his gloves. Okay? Yeah. And Ellering would take the glove off, and then out of the glove fell the foreign object, which looked like it was about the length of a fork.
Yeah.
Wrapped heavily in wrist tape.
Which was probably supposed to be like brass knucks, but did not look at all like brass knucks.
How would you put that into a boxing glove, which is padded, okay? And then with your own hand in there, how would that make any difference at all in hurting someone more?
I feel like it would hurt your hand more, honestly, than it would hurt them with the padded glove.
Even as a kid, I thought that was weird. You know? Yeah, just confusing, you know? So then after the match is over, the stylist who came out with Missy Hyatt is getting ready to cut Teddy's hair. So
it didn't really even last long. He barely even got any hair, and then he just left.
Right, yeah. He has the clippers, and he's, buzzing at the back of Teddy's head, which is already pretty bald. Okay? He's buzzing at it for maybe, I don't know, it seemed like no time at all. And then he's like, okay, well, I'm done. And then I don't know what they paid him, but he had a pretty good night.
Yeah, it was probably a pretty easy night for him.
Turned around, walked away. And then Teddy Long is now, they barely cut anything off. Then Teddy Long is embarrassed that his hair looks bad. His hair before, which if you haven't seen this, I'll describe his hair. He is almost completely bald on the top of his head.
Pretty much.
Before the hair versus hair match. Okay? Almost completely bald. And then on the sides is just a ratty mess of wet, stringy hair.
And it probably was the best thing for him to try to get it cut, but
he didn't even get anything cut off, really.
Not really. What did you actually think of the match? Because watching it for the first time, I was mildly entertained, but I think it was because it was just like a minute or two long. Had that went any time at all, it would have felt too long. But I felt the time they gave them made it an entertaining thing for the fans.
Yeah, and I think I had a good time watching it. It was good for what it was. And like you said, it wasn't very long. It was almost 2 minutes. And if it would have went any longer than that, I probably would have liked it less.
Yeah, I agree.
But they got there. They got to the point. Everyone wanted to see Teddy get his head shaved. That's the whole reason to watch the match. And maybe when Jim Ross said, don't go to the refrigerator, what he meant was, this isn't going to be any time at all. So if you go there, you're going to miss this entire next match.
Probably.
Yeah, because it was not even 2 minutes. All right, and the next match was the first of 2 tag team title matches. It was for the United States tag team titles, and it was the Midnight Express against Brian Pillman and the Z-Man Tom Zink. What'd you think of the Z-Man?
I liked the match. I had seen the Z-Man before on some stuff with WCW when I used to watch it as a kid. I would say that they had a pretty solid tag team. I think it was good for them. They seem to like to take those two like younger guys. WCW like to take two young guys and just put them together and see what worked and what didn't. Because there's a lot of tag teams that we could go through on probably another show of just WCW guys that were thrown together and made tag team champions.
Yeah, Pillman and Zink, I thought had really good chemistry
They did.
As a team. Yeah, they never got a name.
No.
I don't think. It was just always Brian Pillman and the Z-Man. Tom Zink, I think, is criminally underrated because he was really good, but like he was another one of those guys that looked great. He could do all the stuff in the ring, but he didn't have the personality to like go any higher. And in American wrestling, you definitely need that, larger than life persona if you're ever gonna break through and go to the top.
And that's probably why they mainly stuck him in tag teams, because he did okay in the tag team in WWE or WWF at the time too with Martel. They were the Can-Am connection. But as far as a match, and like now watching this match, I think they made the right decision giving the Midnight Express the match.
Yeah. If this was the Samoan SWAT team against Pillman and Zink, I think it would have been good, but it would not have been as good as this.
No.
And did you catch how the Midnight Express's music was changed by WWE?
They changed it.
Yeah. So sometimes in these old shows, WWE will go in and replace entrance music that they do not have a license to have. And I guess they didn't have the license for the Midnight Express theme song. So they kind of put a song that sounded like it. They cut the audio where you would normally hear the introduction and the theme song, and they cut it right before Gary Michael Capetta could finish announcing the Midnight Express. So you didn't even hear the name of the team or the members or any of that stuff. It's cut. The new theme song is placed over, and WWE put crowd noises under the song, so it didn't seem as janky. But you could definitely tell that it was janky.
It was.
Yeah. And then before the match, I had totally forgot the stipulation was to put Jim Cornette in a cage.
Which he made that really entertaining. Cornette does really good with stuff like that.
Yeah. So there was a shark cage at ringside, which will come into play later. Foreshadowing. So they put Jim Cornette in the cage because they didn't want him to interfere in the match. And so he was out there just flipping out the whole time, trying to give advice to Stan Lane and Bobby Eaton. And the camera would always like zoom in on him, and that would interrupt their strategy session. And then they would break, and the heels would never get the advice from Cornette. Before he got put in the cage, though, Cornette's living it up outside the ring. Okay, like he doesn't have to, get locked in this cage. So then the baby faces chase him into the ring, and he's in the ring, and Pee-wee, Randy Anderson, the referee, clotheslines Cornette. What do you think of that clothesline?
I didn't think it was bad.
No, I think it was Cornette definitely made that.
He made it look better.
Because Randy Anderson barely put his arm up, but Cornette's like, you're supposed to clothesline me, so I'm just going to run into your shoulder, kind of, and then take a good bump.
Mm-hmm. That's about what he did.
Yeah, because it didn't look like Randy tried very hard. So which Midnight Express did you like better? Did you like Dennis Condrey and Bobby Eaton, or Bobby Eaton and Sweet Stan Lane?
Bobby Eaton and Stan Lane are the ones that I know more prevalent. I didn't watch a lot of matches with the other two.
Bobby Eaton and Dennis Condrey looked like a grizzled old porn star. He had, this just really like messy hair and the mustache and a lot of body hair, and he had a bandana tied around his neck.
Okay, I remember that.
Great wrestler, though. Okay, great promo. Dennis Condrey was just awesome, but he did look like a porn star who had spent too much time in the business, wanted to get out a long time ago, but they kept pulling him back in.
Kept him there.
Yep. Now I like Lane and Eaton. Stan Lane was actually I don't know what discipline he studied, but he was really good with martial arts.
Those kicks were solid.
Yeah, he was very good with them. And it's crazy because like at that time, Bobby Eaton was considered a high flyer.
It is shocking to think about that now, but when you think about it, he was considered, because he had the top rope Alabama Jam, but he didn't do a lot of the flippy-do stuff that you would consider a high flyer nowadays.
Right, he's the biggest guy in the match, and he's a high flyer. The Alabama Jam that he did look really good.
It did.
And they had lost the crowd in some of the earlier matches because the building wasn't filled up because of the boo-boo on the tickets. But the fans, they had the crowd here. The crowd was into this match. And Lane accidentally back body dropped Eaton over the top rope. And what I liked about that moment was Jim Ross asked if that was a disqualification. What that does is it reminds the fans who are watching about the rules. This wasn't Bill Watts era WCW, so the top rope thing shouldn't have been illegal.
It shouldn't have been, and I still wouldn't have also thought it was illegal, because if you backdropped your own partner, that's kind of on you. Right.
Jumping off the top rope was not illegal here. It would later become illegal when Bill Watts took over booking in WCW a few years later. There was I love this match. It was probably my favorite match of the night. And that's close because I did like one of the other matches coming up here almost as much as this.
I would say it was my second favorite this match was.
Yeah. Did you catch the Jesus Loves Wrestlers sign
at the end of it? Yeah.
This guy's like, this is it. Okay. This is the sign I'm going to bring. What sign are you bringing to the show, Dan? And then Dan
unfolds the sign.
Unfolds it, and it says, Jesus Loves Wrestlers. Oh, great. Yeah, the wrestlers are really going to love that.
They're going to love it.
I loved it, but like in an ironic way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, the moment everyone was anxiously awaiting, RoboCop.
The RoboCop segment.
Yeah. Now he's backstage with Gordon Soley, and the feed kept getting cut. Okay, so they put a bunch of like static and error messages that you wouldn't normally see on a live feed anywhere, and RoboCop is walking, and Gordon Soley's trying to catch him, but because the feed was so bad, we didn't get to see anything. Mm-mm. While that's going on, Sting is jumped
by the Horsemen and thrown in the shark cage.
Yeah, they beat him up a little bit. They threw him in Cornette's shark cage, and then they locked it. RoboCop is coming to the ring to save Sting, moving really, really slow. But he's a robot, okay? Actually, he was a human being who was murdered
and made a robot.
And then scientists fused his flesh with robot materials and then turned him into a crime-fighting killing machine. And he's moving so slow, coming to the ring. And then he gets there, Horsemen back off. He grabs the bars and bends them. And when I was a kid and I saw that, I thought that was stupid. Okay? I thought it was stupid, but the fans ate it up.
The fans loved it. And what kind of surprised me was how quick and pretty much unneeded the segment was, because I thought they would have at least, usually like with WWF, for example, when they incorporate these people into these matches or into segments, they at least teach him to maybe do one basic move. Like RoboCop didn't even touch the Horseman. He just bent the bars, got Sting out, and then boom, segment over.
Yeah, he could have at least torn Ole Anderson in half.
Something like clothesline or something.
But if he's a guy that can bend metal bars and rip a cage door off its hinges, I mean, he's not going to be able to do.
I guess that's true.
He'd murder them. We would have had a murder there, you know. Also, his armor was plastic. You could tell.
You could pretty much tell that it was plastic.
Yeah, he looked like a cosplayer.
I could highly doubt that it was probably even the person that played RoboCop in the movies. It was probably just some random person. I mean, I could be wrong. I don't know, but I highly doubt they got the actual person.
They probably had to put an Armstrong brother.
Probably in the RoboCop. They're like, hey, you're going to be RoboCop for the night.
Yeah. Hey, take off your ding dong costume. Okay. I have the opportunity of a lifetime for you. You're going to put on this janky RoboCop costume and save Sting, okay? Then we had the Junkyard Dog in the best promo of the night. Now, during this time, Dave Meltzer had started calling Junkyard Dog the junk food dog, which I thought was pretty low of Meltzer, because if you're supposed to be like a wrestling journalist, you probably shouldn't be throwing your own opinions into the stuff you're covering, but you really shouldn't be calling people names. Because I don't know what Junkyard Dog would have done to Meltzer to, warrant him calling him the junk food dog because he had gained weight. That seems like a childish thing to do.
It is. It's just like no need for it.
Right. And by all accounts, Junkyard Dog seemed like a pretty nice guy.
I did really like the promo. At first, not so much. Then when Cornette came out, the stuff with Cornette and JYD was fantastic. Oh, my God.
Great. Yeah, so after Cornette came out, it did pick up. Cornette wanted to know where Junkyard Dog had been, because Junkyard Dog's saying, I'm here to stay, and I'm not going anywhere. And Chris says, well, where have you been?
And then JYD gives out an address.
He gives out an address in Louisville, Kentucky, and it takes Cornette a moment. He goes, that's my mother's house. And then JYD says, that's what I'm saying. I'm your daddy. And it was
good
just
stuff. Awesome.
Cornette's flipping out. Best Junkyard Dog promo I've ever seen. JYD, you killed it here, buddy. Then we have the Corporal Punishment match.
That was my favorite match of the night, honestly.
Yeah, that was your favorite? Okay. Yeah. I probably would have liked this more if they had done something different with the straps.
I thought it was actually going to be a strap match. They just kind of had straps.
Right, which is okay, but Jim Ross and Bob Caudle didn't know that.
Yeah, I could tell.
Yeah, they thought that they were going to be attached to each other with the straps, but somebody didn't communicate the change to Ross and Caudle, so that was kind of weird. Like, why wouldn't you smarten your announcers up?
You would think, yeah.
To that. This ended up being a better change, because if you could just go get the strap and use it, that's cool. I'm behind that. But the straps were in the corners of the partners. So you could just get your partner could hand you the strap at any moment.
Pretty much.
So I didn't like that. I felt like if you could just go get the strap at any time, it should be in like a neutral corner where you could go get it and someone could stop you from getting it.
Yeah, that would make sense. It would be more cutoffs and more.
But the reason I liked that you weren't connected with the strap is because they got to play around before the strap was used. Better this way than if they were connected with the strap, is because we got to see the match without the strap for a few minutes. But then once someone actually got that strap, fans popped.
They did.
Yeah, they loved that. The Rock and Roll Express were wearing them out and, whipping them. Michael Hayes and Jimmy Jam Garvin got lit up with those straps. And then they rolled outside the ring Everyone was excited. Everyone loved it. Throwing babies in the air.
It was yeah.
Yeah. Awesome stuff. And do you see what the Rock and Roll Express were doing that you really don't see babyface teams do?
They were switching without tagging, which is weird because they're baby faces, but also in a corporal punishment match, I don't know that would be necessarily important. Like, you're already allowed to use straps on your opponent. Do you have to really worry about who's the legal man?
Foreshadowing. Given what happens later, who knows? But this was, it's strange to see them like hide these things from the referee. But it seemed like at that time, WCW was very into like, there's still rules. You can be counted out, you can be disqualified, even though you're in a stipulation match. Because they were still very by the book.
They were.
Even before Bill Watts came in and, put his infamous 10 rules to the dressing room. But yeah, they were switching in and out. Gibson and Morton, the Rock and Roll Express, were switching in and out like a heel would do. One guy would come in, take over, and then they would smack their hand to make it sound like they had made a tag, and they didn't. But it didn't seem necessary to me because they could have just tagged normally.
Tagged and yeah. They were right there.
They were just right there. Great match though. Really cool. And who ended up winning that, Russell?
The Rock and Roll Express actually went over on that match.
Yeah, so the Rock and Roll Express ended up winning the match. And, it wasn't for a title. It was just to settle some sort of grudge.
Yeah.
Couldn't tell you what that grudge was. Because it's hard to find the old Saturday night episodes to get any context for that. Because I don't think the Peacock goes back that far for Saturday night.
I don't think they do for Saturday night.
No. YouTube has a lot of Saturday night on there, but it's not like every episode.
Yeah, it's hit and miss.
Yeah. This show was so big on tag team matches.
It was. Most of the matches were tag team matches. And the next match was actually a really solid tag team match, too.
Yeah. Doom and the Steiners. Doom is Ron Simmons and Butch Reed. And these two teams, like, they just beat.
It was hard hitting.
Yeah, they beat the crap out of each other. And it's cool to see that because, like, early 90s Steiner brothers in WCW, you got to see them just beat people up. And if the Steiners didn't want to do something, you were not going to make them do it. But if they wanted you to do something, you were going to do it or they were going to throw you. You had one option, and that was go with it. Yeah. Yeah, you just had to just go with it. And even Simmons and Reed, who were two big guys, Rick and Scott were just throwing them around the ring whenever they wanted. But hard-hitting match, really, really fun. And the finish, I thought was...
The finish was good.
Great, yeah. So Rick is trying to do a belly-to-belly superplex on Butch Reed. Simmons gets in the ring behind the referee's back, hits Rick in the back. Butch falls on top of Rick. They come off the rope together, and Butch lands on him and then gets the cover.
Wins the belts.
They win the World Tag Team titles. Reed and Simmons do. Now, Theodore R. Long had a roller coaster.
His guy, Mark, won. Then he gets his head semi-shaved.
Yep.
He lost that match. And then Doom wins the tag team titles.
I don't remember. Did Teddy have the do-rag on during this?
I don't remember, but I'm thinking that's when WCW Teddy Long with the do-rag probably came into play. Do-rag Teddy was great. It was.
Yeah. That was the best Teddy Long stuff in WCW. Was when he had the do-rag. Now the main event, Lex Luger versus Ric Flair. Luger's trying to get revenge against Flair and the Horsemen for what they did to him back in February at Wrestle War and for what they did to Sting. And it was a cage match, but it was a weird looking cage.
It was a very weird looking cage. And I felt like Flair did his job that night. Flair made Luger look like $1 million.
Yeah. And Luger was one of those guys that you hear about who wasn't a fan of the business before he got into it. And I think a lot of times these guys get a bad rap. Lex Luger's, Goldberg's, Brock Lesnar's, people like that who weren't fans before they got into business, but they got into the business to make money. And these people just get an insane amount of hate from wrestling fans because they think, well, if you're going to be in the wrestling business, you should have been a fan before you started doing this stuff. That logic doesn't apply to anything.
Being a fan and being younger, like I used to kind of get that, but then you think about it, well, it's a business to make money. Like any job that you have that everybody has in their everyday life, someone's not going to be like, well, you didn't enjoy that before. Why are you doing it now?
Yeah, to make money, and they did. All three of those guys made a ton of money. This cage match was included in WWE's Greatest Cage Matches of All Time DVD that was released in 2011. DVDs were the successor to VHS tapes. If you don't know what they are, they were a disc that looked like a CD. CDs were the successor of the cassette tape and the precursor to the digital download. So anyway, do you think this match was good enough to be put in the greatest cage matches of all time?
Personally, no, because I didn't like the finish.
Yeah. So a finish to me, and apparently to you, if the finish is bad, it can mess up the whole match.
It can, and I didn't know about the Wrestle War thing until you started talking about it earlier. So I think that makes me hate this even more because their last match ended in a count out. So this should have been the match that settled the feud in the cage, and it ended in DQ.
Right. Yeah. The story going into this match was that Luger's knee was hurt and because of the infection that he had. And WCW had warned him not to take the match, but Luger insisted. And they did the same story with Luger that they did with Sting. They're both hurt, but here they are. They've shown up because they both want to fight the Horsemen, although Luger was the one that was allowed to wrestle and Sting wasn't. Great match up until the DQ finish.
It was solid.
Yeah. They really made use of the cage, which if you haven't seen this match, the gaps in the cage were big.
They were
big. You could fit a child through them. I don't know why you would.
A little stinger.
A little stinger, yeah. You could fit little stingers through the cage all night long, and you could,
Ric Flair's chopping him and going woo.
Oh, Lex is in trouble. We need the stingers. And then you just keep feeding the stingers through the cage, and then the little stingers help Lex beat the Horseman. That didn't happen, though. An army of children were not fed through the cage.
Or were they? Watch it and find out.
Or were they? Subscribe to the Peacock and see if WCW shoved children through a steel cage. Okay? Because we're not going to tell you whether it happened or not. But yes, it was a very physical match. Lex Luger was limited, always was. But I think there was still a lot of value in Lex Luger.
There was a lot of value. He was a good big guy, and if you had the right person working with him, they knew how to make him look like $1 million, and he knew how to do what he needed to do well enough to get himself over too.
One of the cool things about Lex was that he knew what he didn't know, and if he didn't know something, he'd ask, or somebody could tell him, "Hey, you need to do X, Y, or Z," and he'd do it. He didn't have the same path into the wrestling business that a lot of people had. So he was very limited. Like his wrestling training, he didn't train the same way that like Ric Flair or Sting or any of these other guys, Arn Anderson, Sid. He didn't train the same way that all these people trained. So he only knew certain things. And like you said, if he had the right person in the ring working with him, they could make him look like $1 million and they can accentuate his strengths and they could hide what he's bad at. But if you want to see a good example of what we're talking about, go watch this fan cam video of Bruiser Brody versus Lex Luger in a cage and see what a Lex Luger match looks like with someone who just doesn't want to cooperate with him.
Luger gets scared.
Yeah, spoiler. Say spoiler.
Spoiler.
Please. Spoiler. There you go.
Spoiler, Luger gets scared.
Spoiler, Luger is terrified of Bruiser Brody because he had stopped cooperating with him, and Luger just climbs the cage and runs away. Yeah. Now, Sting and El Gigante end up helping Luger after he was attacked by the Horsemen, which led to the DQ. Ole Anderson got the remote to the cage
and lifted it
a bit so the Horsemen could enter it, beat up Lex, and Sting and El Gigante came out to save Luger. But you know who didn't?
RoboCop did not come out. I did like the remote thing just because it was a different feel. Like you always see somebody screwing up a cage match because they get the keys or they get this. I've never seen anyone grab a remote and lift the cage. Mm-hmm. Different take on it. So I kind of liked that part. I just didn't like the DQ finish.
Yeah, I thought that was really cool. But I also was wondering, like, what was RoboCop doing?
He was probably taking his plastic. The Armstrong was taking his plastic off already.
Yeah, Brad Armstrong already he's like, I already got all this shit off. I'm not putting all this shit back on. And then by the time he got there to save Lex Luger, the show would have been over.
They would just sent the ding dong out there.
The fans would have already left the building. It took him a year to get to the ring. Yeah, he's like, I got all this shit off me. I'm not doing it already.
So let's send El Gigante out there.
Yeah, let's send El Gigante after there, who moved to the ring faster than RoboCop.
He did, actually.
That's something we have to give El Gigante credit for. El Gigante, you moved faster than a robot.
Good job.
Yeah. What did you think of the end credits?
I didn't understand why.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, it was another very WCW thing to do, is to have end credits to your wrestling show.
And they actually, if I remember correctly, they continued that on to even the 90s. The 90s used to do that, if I remember correctly, in their pay-per-views too.
Yeah, I think Eric Bischoff put a stop to that when he had taken over. And I don't remember exactly the moment, the year, the month, the day, but it seemed like something that stopped when he had taken over.
Somewhere in the Bischoff era, yeah.
Yeah. So overall thoughts on the show?
Overall thoughts on the show I thought was solid. I liked the show overall. The SWAT team match was too long. I didn't like the DQ finish. So that put a little bit of damper on the whole show for me, considering that was the main event. Yeah. But taking that part out of it, it's definitely worth a watch. Definitely.
If you haven't seen early 90s WCW, this is a good show to watch. There's definitely stuff that is not as good as this. This is one of the better pay-per-views that you can check out.
I would agree.
Yeah. I really liked it too, save for, a couple bits. RoboCop. But yeah, all in all, very good show. So, Russell, thanks for doing this with me.
No problem. It was actually really cool to get to do this.
Yeah. All right. So that's the first show review that we have. This was Capital Combat 90. I'm Kevin.
This is Russell.
And thanks for watching the KR Show.